This is Ludwig Maximilians Universität in Munich. On the morning of Thursday, the 18th of February 1943, Professor Kurt Huber was giving a lecture on philosophy. In the meantime, brother and sister Hans and Sophie Schurl were in the atrium of the university. They had a suitcase full of leaflets written by Professor Kurt Huber and edited by Hans Schurl and Alexander Schmorell. The siblings laid out the leaflets in the university building, and apparently unseen, they decided to go home. However, it would appear that they realized that they still had some leaflets and went back to the atrium. Sophie threw the leaflets over the balcony, but this time she was spotted. The caretaker, a locksmith named Jakob Schmidt, saw them and rushed to them, declared them arrested, and handed them over to the head caretaker, Albert Scheithammer. The two then brought them to the 40-year-old university administrator, Karl Ernst Hefner, and rector, Walter Wurst, who in turn notified the Gestapo. The Schurls were then taken to the Wittelsbacher Palais, the Gestapo headquarters on Brenner Strasse in Munich. They initially denied their involvement, but during a search of their home, proof of their involvement was found. They confessed. They were put on trial on Monday the 22nd of February 1943 and sentenced to death and killed the same day. The Schurls were members of an anti-Nazi resistance organisation called the White Rose. They produced 6 leaflets which were distributed at various locations around Germany. The beliefs that shaped those in the White Rose were humanistic values which had been discussed at literary and philosophical meetings at the university. The organisation came together in the summer of 1942. The group wrote, printed and distributed a total of 6 leaflets with a print run of around 9,000 copies. In the wake of the debacle at Stalingrad, they also used graffiti as a way of getting their message across, something probably quite effective given the losses there and that the regime had been unable to hide the extent of the defeat. Hans Schurl and Alexander Schmorell wrote anti-Nazi slogans on the nights of the 3rd, 8th and 15th of February around Munich and especially around the area of the university. These slogans were the likes of "Down with Hitler," "Hitler the mass murderer," and "Freedom." It may well have been the defeat at Stalingrad and the hope that the war had completely changed course and that the day of liberation was close, which encouraged the Schurls to take the rash course of action they took on the 18th of February 1943. What perhaps makes the White Rose so remarkable is the incredible courage shown by effectively defenseless people fighting for moral integrity and their willingness to make even the ultimate sacrifice for the common good against the background of a totalitarian dictatorship. Most of the members of the White Rose were rounded up by the Gestapo and many were killed. However, some survived the war, and the last survivor of the group, Traute Lafrenz, died on the 6th of March 2023. Traute Lafrenz was born in Hamburg on the 3rd of May 1919. She went to the same school as later Federal Chancellor Willi Brandt. One of her teachers was Erna Stahl, noted for her progressive ideology. In 1935, the Nazis removed Erna Stahl from her position. In a 2018 interview with Bild magazine, Traute believed that Willy Brandt could have intervened on her behalf, but chose not to do so. On graduating from school, Traute did her compulsory Reich Labor Service before going on to Hamburg University to study medicine. After the end of the semester, she was deployed as part of the Reich Labor Service to help with the harvest in East Prussia. It was here that she met Alexander Schmorell. Alexander was a future member of the White Rose, and they met each other again when both returned to Hamburg to continue their studies in medicine. In May 1941, Traute Lafrenz moved to the University of Munich, where she met Hans Schurl and Christoph Probst. She fell in love with Hans Schurl, the brother of Sophie Schurl. The White Rose started out as a discussion group on literature, philosophy and the arts. However, it started gravitating towards resistance to the regime. Philosophy professor Kurt Huber also took part in these discussions. In the late autumn of 1942, Traute Lafrenz brought the third White Rose leaflet to Hamburg and gave it to his former schoolmate Heinz Kucharski, who distributed it. The role that Heinz Kucharski played in the organization remains controversial, and I may deal with it in a future video. As a result of the arrests of Hans and Sophie Scholl on the 18th of February 1943, suspicion also fell on Traute Lafrenz. Sophie Scholl mentioned her in the first statement that she gave to the Gestapo on the day of her arrest. When we entered the university building, my brother and I saw several students on the stairs to the second floor. They were just leaving Dr. Huber's lecture. One of the students I know is Traute Lafrenz from Hamburg. She is in her 7th or 8th semester of medical studies. I have known Lafrenz for about a year. I met her through my brother. As we passed one another, I said hello, and she returned my greeting. In her third interrogation of the 20th of February 1943, Sophie Scholl recounted how she had first come across the White Rose. Last summer, around the middle of July, Miss Traute Lafrenz, medical student with whom I'm well acquainted, gave me a leaflet entitled Leaflet of the White Rose to read during a break between lectures at the university. As far as I know, this leaflet had the number 4 at the top. I believe I can still remember that as Lafrenz was giving me this document, she told me that she had received it either that day or several days earlier. The document was mailed to her in an envelope. As I was reading through this leaflet, my brother and, if I recall correctly, the student Hubert Furtwängler, a nephew of the famous conductor from the Black Forest, was standing next to me. They read the leaflet over my shoulder. My brother did not let on, either through his demeanour, facial expressions or remarks, that he had anything to do with this document, that is, with its production and distribution. Even whilst I was reading it, I asked the people standing around what the title The White Rose could possibly mean. If I recall correctly, my brother said that during the French Revolution, the exiled aristocracy used a white rose as a symbol on their flags. A few days later, I was talking to my brother once more about this leaflet. When I asked him who he thought was the author of the leaflet, who could it be, he said that it was not a good thing to ask about the writer of the leaflet, because in doing so, the writer could be endangered. I did not see or hear anything else related to the leaflet The White Rose in any manner. I must strongly dispute the accusation that I had anything to do with the writing, the production, or the distribution of this document. In July 1942, a rumour was spreading throughout the university that, I don't know who even said this to me back then, but that the disseminator of The White Rose had been caught, that is, arrested, sentenced, and executed. Sophie Scholl said this under Gestapo interrogation, and it is probably not true, and I think here that she was trying to protect those around her. Hans Scholl, in his interrogation of the 18th of February, also mentions Traute. Now, Traute had been his girlfriend, or still was his girlfriend. The impression I get is that Hans had sort of lost interest in her as being his partner by this time, but I could be mistaken. To the question, did you meet anyone you knew on the way from your apartment to the university, he responded, I did not meet anyone on the way, but directly in front of the entrance to the university on Ludwigstrasse, I met the medical student Willi Graf, who resides at Mandelstrasse, and the medical student Traute Lafrenz. I don't know where she lives. Both of them had left the university together and were going to the psychiatric hospital. I didn't see anyone else I knew at the university. I think it's rather difficult to believe he did not know where his girlfriend, or maybe former girlfriend, lived, but I presume what he was trying to do was to protect her. During his 5th interrogation on the 21st of February 1943, he stated, Lafrenz is of no consequence to me at all. Alexander Schmorell also mentioned Traute in his initial interrogation on the 25th of February 1943. He also tried to protect her by denying that she was involved in the White Rose. He stated, I know a female student named Lafrenz who is from Hamburg and currently studies in Munich. I know her only casually from my time in Hamburg. I introduced Miss Lafrenz to the Scholl siblings. She dropped by the Scholl siblings' residence often, but I don't believe that she knew of our treasonous propaganda from them. I know Miss Lafrenz only casually, and I would be very wary of trusting her with such a thing. Traute learned of the arrest of the Schorrells quite quickly on the 18th of February 1943. Probably all the students were discussing it. After all, they had been held in the university whilst the Gestapo did its initial investigation. She attended their burial on the 24th of February 1943 with the parents of Sophie and Hans. On the 26th of February 1943, Traute received a summons to appear before the Gestapo. She was interrogated for a few hours and asked very detailed questions about her relationship to Hans Schorrell. She was also asked about Professor Huber, who of course was involved in the White Rose. On the 15th of March 1943, she was arrested and she was indicted alongside Alexander Schmorell, Professor Kurt Huber, Wilhelm Graf, Hans Herzl, Susan Herzl, Franz Müller, Heinrich Güter, Eugen Grimminger, Heinrich Bollinger, Helmut Bauer, Erich Faul, Walter Harnack, Gisela Schürtling and Katharina Schüttenkopf. One of the things asked by the Gestapo of those they questioned was their attitude to National Socialism. The same was done by the Communists. For example, in 1981, when a friend of mine was brought in for questioning by the secret police in Gdansk in Poland, he was asked, "How do you find socialism?" His response was that he had enough to eat and didn't consider such questions. The interrogation protocols of people brought into the Gestapo show similar responses. As to the attitude of Traute to the National Socialist dictatorship, the Munich Gestapo wrote a memo on the 29th of March 1943 that she did not have leanings towards Nazism. She had a pessimistic view with regards to the outcome of the war and believed National Socialism accountable for what she perceived to be a lost war. The interrogator noted that according to the impressions he received in reference to her political attitudes, he believed that Lafrenz would most like a democratic form of government. This trial took place on the 19th of April 1943, the very same day as hundreds of kilometers to the east the Warsaw Ghetto uprising broke out. Presiding judge of the court was none other than Roland Freisler, whilst the other judges were SS Gruppenführer and Major General of the Waffen-SS Breithaupt, SA Gruppenführer Bünger, SA Gruppenführer and Deputy Secretary of State Köhlmeier, and representing the Chief Prosecutor of the Reich was Assistant Prosecutor Bischoff. Trials before the People's Court, if indeed they could be called trials, were usually just a few questions, with Freisler shouting personal insults at the defendants with no opportunity for cross-examination by the lawyers for the defence, and where guilt was already predetermined. The point of this kangaroo court was to deter others from getting involved in acts of resistance, and as such was given publicity. After the attempted coup of the 20th of July 1944, the trials were filmed with a view to putting them on general release, although this did not happen. There are other videos on this channel relating to the People's Court which you might be interested in seeing. The trial of the 19th of April 1943 led to death sentences for Alexander Schmorell, Kurt Huber and Wilhelm Graf. Heinrich Güter, Gisela Schürtling, Katharina Schüttenkopf and Traute Lafrenz were found guilty of having knowledge of the intentions of the group and not reporting them. Not reporting such things was, of course, a serious crime for the Nazis. Güter received 18 months in prison, whereas the women got the lesser sentence of 1 year in prison, and the reason for the lesser sentence was because they were women and seen as the weaker sex for the National Socialists. The others got various prison sentences except for Falk Harnack, who was acquitted, something very rare from the People's Court. After serving her sentence, Traute was released on the 14th of March 1944. She was arrested again 2 weeks later as part of the investigation into the Hamburg branch of the White Rose and taken to Fuhlsbüttel police station in Hamburg. In a documentary, she remembered, we were then taken to our interrogator and he gave me a log of about 50 pages and everything I said and did and everything was right. What I had heard on the radio and what banned books I'd read. Somebody clearly had betrayed her. At Fuhlsbüttel police station Hamburg, she said, there were some girls and they could sing very well. And they sang, Harre mein Seele, harre des Herrn, wait my soul, wait for the Lord, which is a hymn. Traute said that these moments gave her strength for the interrogations to come. In November 1944, she was transferred to the women's prison in Cottbus. In February 1945, she was transferred from there via the Leipzig-Mörsdorf women's prison to the St. Georgen prison in Bayreuth. She was liberated there by American troops on the 15th of April 1945. In 1947, Traute emigrated to the United States. She received her medical degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and from St. Joseph's Hospital in San Francisco. On the 2nd of March 1949, she married Dr. Vernon Page, with whom she had 4 children. From 1972 to 1994, she was the director of the Esperanza School for Special Needs Children in Chicago. After her retirement, she and her husband moved to South Carolina. Vernon Page died in 1995, and from then on, Traute Lafrenz Page lived in her former summer house on Yonkers Island. You can see this house in a Bild interview, a link to which is provided below. Indeed, there will be several links below. In April 2019, as the last survivor of the White Rose, she was awarded the Cross of Merit First Class of the Federal Republic of Germany. The Order of Merit was presented to her at her place of residence in South Carolina by the German Consul General Heike Fuller on the occasion of her 100th birthday on the 3rd of May 2019. Traute Lafrenz died on the 6th of March 2023, aged 103. The CSU and Freie Wähler political parties in a joint press release said that something to her memory should be in Munich. It would be conceivable, for example, they argued, to rename a section of Orleansstrasse Traute Lafrenzstrasse. A fence runs between Orleansstrasse and the railway tracks on which one of the best-known photographs of the resistance group was taken. The site will soon be redeveloped, and according to the Münchner Wochenanzeiger, a memorial to the White Rose is also to be created, and this would be a suitable location to remember Traute. I think that it's very important to remember the extreme courage of these people offering non-violent resistance to a brutal dictatorship which had spies everywhere. I think it's especially important today, at a time, to remember these young Germans and to think of their counterparts today in Russia, where we can see the incredible heroism of, above all, young Russian women who have stood up to the neo-Nazi regime in the Kremlin, which, like the German Nazis 80 years earlier, has its spies and traitors everywhere. Traute Lafrenz survived the war, but many did not. In remembering her name, we should also be prepared to remember those fighting Putin's form of National Socialism in Russia today. And let's hope that these Russian heroines are also appropriately remembered in the future. And also, in my opinion, just as it's wrong to blame Germans for Nazism, let's not blame Russians for the Nazism that exists from Putin's followers today. I hope you found that interesting. I have done a number of videos on the White Rose, such as on the caretaker who handed the Schirl siblings over to the Gestapo. I've done a video on the Gestapo official who interrogated Sophie Schirl, and many other videos beside. So if you're interested, then you might want to subscribe. They will be coming up in the future. Obviously, I try to get this done as soon as possible because it was close to the death of Traute Lafrenz, and so this serves as an obituary and as a tribute, I hope, to this incredibly courageous young lady, as she was at the time of the war. So all the best from me in Germany.